This is the Gospel of Rock, and we're going to talk about Blowin' in the Wind, classic by Bob Dylan. And the living legend known as Bob Dylan, Robert Zimmerman. You can call him whatever, but I want to start by saying the truth is right under our gnosis, and I'll explain a little bit more what I mean by that as we go along. This song apparently was written in 1962, and then it was included on the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan album in 1963. Originally, Bob Dylan played it in concert in 62 with only 2 verses, and I believe the second verse was the verse that was left out originally. And I remember reading somewhere that second verse was not considered as good as the other 2 verses. How many years can, let's see where we are here. Well, how many years can a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? How many times must a man turn his head and pretend he just doesn't see? I could see how that verse, is not as good as the first verse, which is what I just sang. How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? How many times must the cannonballs fly before they are forever banned? The answer is Blowin' in the Wind. Now the song has, the Rolling Stone has, it's number 15 or something on the Rolling Stone's top 500 songs, which tells you something. And the song has been covered, apparently it's been covered hundreds of times by so many different artists. The most popular version was by Peter, Paul, and Mary in 63. So they actually recorded their version like 3 weeks after Bob Dylan's version was recorded. Or when it came out, I forget. But it's because Albert Grossman was the manager for both Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul, and Mary. So they had the most, and they did their version, Peter, Paul, and Mary did their version in 1 take, which is amazing. Now, so many artists have covered the song, including artists like Stevie Wonder, and there was another version that came out very early with a bunch of, I forget the artist, but a bunch of different people playing guitar in it, including Phil Oakes. But let's just talk a little bit about the we can talk about Bob Dylan just for a moment. Obviously, we want to talk about Bob Dylan. Oh, here's a very important thing I want to bring up, which is this song is classified as a folk song, and Bob Dylan was a folk artist when he started out. He was drawing heavily upon Woody Guthrie, who was his idol, and this song, the lyrics might have been partly based on something that Woody Guthrie wrote in his autobiography, which was Bound for Glory was the name of the autobiography. And it was something about newspapers on New York streets blowing in the wind, something like that. And the other thing, though, to mention about this song is that Pete Seeger pointed out that it was based on a spiritual, one of those Negro spirituals, and the name of the spiritual was No More Auction Block. And if you listen to that song, and there's versions, I was just listening to the versions by Paul Robeson and Odetta, you definitely, it's for sure that and Bob Dylan actually admitted years later that it was based on that song. So here's a folk song that was based on a spiritual that really has even entered, you could say, the classic rock canon because Bob Dylan went from being a folky to being a folk rock artist, influenced in that movement by bands like the Byrds that covered Dylan's songs early on and made them folk rock classics and actually popularized Bob Dylan's songs. By the way, Blowin' in the Wind never hit #1 on the charts, but it's one of the most popular songs ever, obviously. And so Bob Dylan, became a folk rock artist, and then you could say he even is now he's just in the classic rock pantheon. And so in a sense, Blowin' in the Wind is as well. Although, and so, what I want to point out is it started as a spiritual, and so much of all of our music really comes from the African slaves, blues, jazz, Negro spirituals, gospel. It all had a very big influence on the artists that 50s, 60s that really began what we know as rock music, rock and roll music. And obviously this song, Blowin' in the Wind, what is Bob Dylan saying? Is he saying that the answer, there is an answer? Is that what he's saying? There is an answer, and the answer is in the wind of spirit. So many cultures and languages have the same word for wind and spirit. And let's just look at Hebrew. Bob Dylan, Robert Zimmerman, he's from a Jewish background. Not that it matters, but the word for spirit in Hebrew is ruach, or one of the words is ruach, like Ruach HaKodesh, Holy Spirit. Or in Genesis, God blows into the nostrils of Adam the ruach, right? What is that breath? The breath or the wind is spirit, is the enlivening force that brings life. And so Blowin' in the Wind could very well be talking about, spirit. Spirit has the answer. Look to spirit for the answer. And that will answer all your questions. On the other hand, Bob Dylan was only 21 years old when he wrote this song. He was a precocious prodigy from early on. He had a true gift, and he knew it, and he, unlike most of us, who either learned over time or we didn't learn, and we're all horrible imitators and copycats. But we'll just say this, that Bob Dylan also copied a lot of stuff. A lot of his early songs were taken, a lot of the melodies were taken from old folk songs from different traditions, like Irish folk songs, or you can name many of his early songs he actually borrowed from other songs. Like, I was just listening to The Patriot Game, which became God on Our Side, and it's a very it's almost like Bob Dylan just rewrote the words, and the words even are very similar to the Patriot Game. So, but Bob Dylan, he was a young guy, and he was starting out, and he was smart. He knew that he needed to be in a tradition, and he chose the folk tradition, and he updated the folk tradition for the time that he was in, the generation he was in, the 1960s. And so you could look at him as a that he stole, borrowed and stole, or you can appreciate his genius, which I think most people do. Anyway, to get back to the idea of Bob Dylan writing this song when he was 21 years old, I think that what he meant, because he was still young, was it was a protest song. It was protesting all the inhumanity of man to man, or how inhuman we are to each other, and how we do not have the eyes to see or the ears to hear. And how long must we sing this song? How long will human ignorance prevail? And how long will there not be peace on earth? And in some ways, you could see this song as a protest, and Bob Dylan basically saying, who knows? It's a horrible situation we're finding ourselves in, and your guess is as good as mine. Who knows? The answer is blowing in the wind. Try as you might to find it, but this world is insane, and so. And let's just say that this song can be read in those different ways, and apparently the Catholic Church even kind of co-opted the song, and said, the first interpretation I gave, which is that the answer is in the wind of spirit. Spirit has the answer. Jesus is the answer, and to accept Jesus is to know the truth. I don't know how Bob Dylan felt about that, and I don't know how the church really felt about Bob Dylan either. But I will say, from my own point of view, and I hesitate to give any answer to these questions. But I will say that what works for me is what I started with, which is the truth is right under our gnosis, right? Gnosis being the Greek word for knowledge, for divine knowledge or spiritual knowledge, for direct spiritual experience, meaning that you directly have revealed knowledge, or you have a direct experience of spirit. And that direct experience of spirit gives you the answer, right? And it's very common. It's a what's the word? It's a cliche to say love is the answer. But I will say that love is the answer. What was the question? Love is the answer. What was the question? And when you have that direct experience of gnosis, which is love, or you could say the love of God, there is no question. There are no more questions. so I look at the song in that way, and I think that Bob Dylan, maybe as much as any other artist, he really embodied the the, the Christ principle. He did attain to Christ consciousness. That is my feeling. I could be wrong, but I don't I don't think that Bob Dylan could have written the songs he wrote without at least tapping into that. And let me just say that tapping into the Christ consciousness is available to everyone, and Christ consciousness is the understanding that in our heart of hearts we know what Jesus knew, and we have this that's available to us just as Jesus did. We have the power and the glory of God, because we are all children of God. We are all equal children of God, and we all have that. We all can tap into that at any moment, and that is the spirit of joy. And the spirit of joy is perhaps most exemplified in music. And when I listened to Bob Dylan, when I really first started listening to him when I was about 20 years old. I was about the age that he really started to put out his music. I think he started he started in his teens, but he really put his first album out, I think, when he was 19 or 20. When I really started listening to him, I really fell in love, and I thought he was the coolest. And I still think that his music and what he did is pure genius, and without a doubt something to be appreciated, if not studied, and if not really given some time to reflect on. Most people won't. Most people will just hear him and say, I don't like his voice. What the fuck is he talking about? And what is this blowing in the fucking wind? No, most people actually appreciate this song, at least, if they don't appreciate Desolation Row. But thank you for listening to this. We're almost at the 20-minute mark, and I don't want to belabor this. I think I said my piece here, and I would love to hear your comments, your feedback. There's so much that we could say about this song, and about Dylan, of course. Who knows how much longer he's going to be around. I'm doing this partly as a tribute to him, and it's easy to take down artists and people that have achieved success, worldly success, and criticize them in whatever way. And certainly we could make critical comments about Bob Dylan. But in a way, he's like Taylor Swift today. Taylor Swift is kind of like an artist beyond reproach. We'll see if it stays that way. But she is experiencing a popularity that is few can really get to that point where most people are saying good things about her. Bob Dylan early on was like that too. I think he was well loved, and he was considered the voice of his generation from early on. I personally prefer his earlier stuff up till like Blood on the Tracks in '75, but he's just great, and he gave all to his art, and God bless him for the work that he has done. And thank you, Bob. And I will say, in Bob we trust. See ya. Stay tuned.